My son called me on a Tuesday morning, and I could tell something was wrong before he even said a word. He's a cardiologist, 34 years old. Works long shifts at Mercy General, the kind of hours that would break most men. I raised him to be steady, calm under pressure, and he always has been. So when I heard that particular silence on the other end of the line, that half-second pause before he spoke, my stomach dropped. "Dad," he said, "is Melissa home right now?" I was standing in the kitchen. I had just poured my second cup of coffee. Through the hallway I could see the living room, and there was my daughter-in-law, sitting cross-legged on the floor in her workout clothes, scrolling through her phone, half watching some morning show on the TV with the volume low. "Yeah," I said slowly. "She's right here. Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, I need you to stay calm, and I need you to not say anything to her yet. Can you do that?" I set my coffee cup down. "Son, talk to me." His name is Jackson, and what he told me in the next 2 minutes turned everything I thought I knew about the last 3 years completely upside down. He had been at a medical conference in Phoenix. 3 days, wrapped up a day early because 2 of the keynote sessions got canceled. He was heading home, already at the airport, already through security, when he stopped at one of those overpriced airport restaurants to grab something to eat before boarding. That's when he saw her, or he thought he saw her. She was at a table near the back, tucked into a corner booth. Dark hair, same build, same way of tilting her head when she laughed. And she was laughing. She was leaning across the table toward a man Jackson didn't recognize, touching his hand and laughing like she hadn't laughed in a long time. Jackson stood there for a full 10 seconds. He said later that his brain kept offering him explanations. A look-alike. A coincidence. He was tired. He hadn't slept well. These things happen. But something made him take out his phone and take a picture before he turned away. Then he called me. "Dad, I'm sending you the photo right now. I need you to tell me that's not her." I opened the message. I walked into the hallway where I could see my daughter-in-law in the living room. I looked at my phone. I looked at her. I didn't say a word. I just walked quietly back into the kitchen and closed the door. "Jackson," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could manage. "Where exactly are you right now?" "Terminal 4. Gate B12. "Dad, is that her or not?" The woman in the photo was wearing a cream-colored blouse I had seen in my daughter-in-law's closet. The man across from her had silver hair, a tan, expensive-looking jacket. They were sharing a bottle of wine. It was 11:15 in the morning. "It looks like her," I said. "It looks exactly like her." I heard him exhale. One long, shaking breath. She told me she was home. She told me she hadn't been feeling well and she was going to rest today. "Dad, she was supposed to be home." I turned so I was facing the window over the sink. Outside, 2 squirrels were chasing each other across the lawn. The morning looked completely ordinary. "I know," I said. "She is home, son. She's in the living room right now." Silence. Then, "That's not possible. My daughter-in-law's name is Melissa. She and Jackson met in medical school, though she dropped out after the first year to pursue what she called the business side of healthcare. She worked in pharmaceutical sales for a while, then transitioned into some kind of consulting role that neither Jackson nor I ever fully understood. She traveled frequently. Client meetings, she said, quarterly reviews, industry summits. She was always very pleasant about explaining it and never quite explained it at all. I had lived with them for almost 2 years by that point. After my wife passed, that was back in 2021, my son sat me down and told me he wasn't going to let me rattle around alone in that big house in Cleveland. He and Melissa had the extra room, and they wanted me there. Melissa had been gracious about it, as far as I could tell. She made me feel welcome. She remembered how I took my coffee. She would sometimes ask about my wife, about how we had met, and she seemed to genuinely want to know. I had liked her. I want to be honest about that. I had truly liked her. But there are things you notice when you live under the same roof as someone. Small things. The way a person's phone always goes face down when they set it on a table. The way certain calls get taken outside or upstairs or in the car with the door shut. The way someone can be warm and present one moment and then just gone, somewhere behind their own eyes. You chalk it up to stress, to the demands of adult life. You tell yourself it's none of your business. I had been telling myself that for a long time. After Jackson hung up with me, he didn't board his flight home. Instead, he moved away from the gate, found a quieter corner of the terminal, and watched. He told me later it was the strangest 40 minutes of his life. He said it felt like watching a movie about someone he thought he knew. The woman at the table, Melissa, or whoever that woman was, didn't look tired. She didn't look like someone who had texted her husband that morning saying she had a headache and was going to stay in bed. She looked relaxed. She looked happy, in a way that made Jackson's chest hurt to describe. At one point, the man reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Jackson took 3 more pictures. Then the two of them got up, gathered their bags, and walked together toward the gates. Jackson followed at a distance, keeping to the far side of the corridor. He watched them stop at gate C7. He looked up at the board. The flight departing from gate C7 was bound for Cancun. He called me again from a different gate, voice steady in that way. That meant he was working very hard to keep it steady. "She's at the airport, Dad. Phoenix Harbor. She's boarding a flight to Cancun right now with a man I've never seen before in my life. And she told me she was homesick." I was still in the kitchen. Through the closed door, I could hear the faint sound of the television. A game show host saying something cheerful. "Jackson," I said, "I'm looking at your wife. She is home. She is sitting in your living room." Another silence, longer than the last. "Then who," he said very quietly, "is the woman at this airport?" It took us the better part of that afternoon to begin to understand what we were actually looking at. Jackson came home that evening instead of confronting either woman at the airport. He wanted to think first. He was always like that, even as a boy. He would go quiet when something hurt him, would think it through from every angle before he let himself react. I have always respected that about him, and I have always, quietly, worried about it too. Some things need to be felt before they can be figured out. He came through the door around 7. Melissa was in the kitchen making dinner by then. She hugged him, said she was feeling better, asked about the conference. Jackson was calm. He was courteous. He kissed her on the cheek and said the conference had been fine, a little boring, glad to be home. After dinner, he told her he was tired and was going to turn in early. Then he came and sat with me in the spare room, and we spread his phone out between us and looked at the photos again. The woman in Phoenix was not Melissa's twin. She was not a look-alike in the casual sense. She was Melissa. The jaw, the nose, the particular way she held herself, the scar above her left eyebrow from a bicycle accident she had told us about the previous Christmas. Everything identical. Except Melissa had been here, in this house, all day. "There has to be an explanation," Jackson said. "There is an explanation," I told him. "We just don't know it yet." What we did over the following 2 weeks I am not entirely proud of. It felt like detective work, and it felt like a betrayal, and it felt like grief, all at the same time. Jackson contacted an old friend from his residency days, a man who had left medicine to work in corporate security. The kind of work that involves locating things people would prefer stayed hidden. He didn't tell this friend everything. He showed him the photos and asked for help verifying what he was seeing. Meanwhile, I paid closer attention. I watched the small things I had been chalking up to stress. I started to notice patterns. Melissa's travel schedule was, on average, 4 to 6 days a month. Always different cities. Always plausible: Detroit for a quarterly meeting, Atlanta for a product launch, San Diego for a conference. She was always reachable, always texted back, always had something reasonable to say about wherever she supposedly was. And yet, Jackson's security friend came back to us inside of 10 days. Melissa's consulting company, the one she had worked for since leaving pharmaceutical sales, had quietly dissolved 18 months earlier. The company no longer existed. Her paychecks were still appearing in their joint account, but they were originating from a shell company registered in Delaware with no public-facing business of any kind. She was not a healthcare consultant. She had not been a healthcare consultant for a year and a half. What she was, as best as Jackson's contact could piece together at that stage, was a woman with 2 lives running in parallel. The man in Phoenix was named Garrett Hollis. I'll use his name because he has since been charged and it's public record. He was a financial broker based in Scottsdale. He was also, it turned out, married. His wife had no idea how Melissa and Garrett had met, how long the arrangement had been going on, what exactly the nature of the relationship was. Those were questions that took longer to answer. But what became clear very quickly was that the trips, the client meetings, the quarterly reviews, they had been for at least 18 months cover stories. Some of them fabricated entirely, some of them partially real. She would fly to a city, attend a half-day event, and then continue somewhere else. She was meticulous about it, I'll give her that, though it gives me no pleasure to do so. Jackson confronted her on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the morning phone call. He waited until I was in the room, not because he needed a witness, but because, and he told me this afterward, he said he was afraid of what he might do if he was alone. Not physically, My son is not a violent man. But he was afraid of disappearing into the kind of grief that swallows you whole. And he needed someone else in the room to keep him tethered. He laid everything on the table. The photos, the information about the shell company, the timeline his contact had pieced together. What I remember most about that night was not what Melissa said in response, though she did speak, at length in that careful way she had of explaining things without quite explaining them. What I remember most is the moment just before Jackson began. He looked at her across the kitchen table, and there was a second where his expression did something I had never seen on my son's face. A kind of bewilderment so deep it looked almost like wonder. Like a man looking at a landscape he thought he knew, and realizing the map in his hand is completely wrong. She did not deny it, that was the other thing. When confronted with specifics, she didn't deny it. She tried at first to frame it as something complicated, something that required context. She talked about feeling lost. She talked about pressure. At one point she said something about feeling invisible in her own marriage that made my jaw tighten. Because my son had sacrificed more than she would ever account for in his efforts to build a life she seemed to have decided wasn't enough. Jackson listened. He let her speak, and then he asked 2 questions. How long? She said 2 years. And the money? Where has the money been going? That was the question that opened the second door. The shell company in Delaware was not just a mechanism for hiding income. It was also receiving money, significant amounts. And the source of that money turned out to be the detail that brought a second investigation into the situation. One that had nothing to do with the marriage and everything to do with the law. I don't want to get too deep into the financial specifics because some of it is still being adjudicated. But the short version is this. Garrett Hollis had been running what investigators later described as a sophisticated investment fraud scheme targeting high-net-worth retirees in the Southwest. He identified elderly individuals with substantial savings, cultivated relationships with them or their families, and funneled their money into vehicles that existed primarily on paper. Melissa had not been a passive participant. She had been, according to the federal indictment that came down 8 months later, an active recruiter. Her consulting background, her warmth, her ability to make people feel seen and heard and trusted, all of that had been put to use deliberately in service of taking money from people who trusted her. The first time I heard that detail, I sat down in my chair and didn't get up for a long time, because I thought about the things she had said to me. The questions about my wife, about how we had met, the way she asked about my retirement. The one conversation, maybe 6 months before the phone call, where she had mentioned almost in passing that she knew a financial advisor with a remarkable track record if I was ever looking for somewhere better to put my savings. I had said no thank you. I had said I was comfortable where things were. I hadn't thought about it since. I thought about it now. I thought about all the other families, all the other living rooms where a woman like Melissa had asked the right questions and listened with the right expression and left with information she was never supposed to have. The divorce was finalized 7 months after that Thursday evening. Melissa was arrested 4 months after the divorce, along with Garrett Hollis and 2 other individuals connected to the scheme. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy, and several counts I don't fully understand but that the attorney described as serious. Her attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement in exchange for testimony against the others. Jackson was quiet during the worst of it. He worked his shifts. He came home. Some nights he would sit with me in the kitchen after dinner, and we would just talk about nothing in particular. About the Cleveland Browns, about that needed fixing around the house, about my wife and the years before any of this had happened. He didn't need me to say much. He just needed me to be there. That part I understood completely. One evening, maybe a month after the arrest, he said something that I have thought about many times since. "Dad, the thing that keeps getting me," he said, "isn't that she lied to me. I can understand lying. People lie when they're scared or greedy or trapped. What I can't get past is how she looked. Those mornings when she kissed me goodbye and told me she'd be home by Thursday, or that she was feeling better, or that she missed me. She looked fine. She looked like herself. I could see her eyes, and there was nothing there that told me. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there is one. What I did tell him was what I believed and still believe, that whatever was behind those eyes was something she had built and maintained for so long that it had its own architecture, its own internal logic, and that a man like my son, a man who had spent his career learning to read the signs of damage in the human body, was never going to catch what she was hiding. because she had decided, a long time ago, that she was very good at this. The fact that she was right is not his failure. I want him to understand that, even now. It's been almost 14 months since the Tuesday morning phone call. Jackson has started running again. Something he gave up years ago when the hospital hours got heavy. He goes out early in the morning, before his shift, 3 or 4 times a week. He came home last month from a charity 5K looking exactly like he used to look at 18. Tired in the good way, something loose around the eyes that had been tight for a long time. He is seeing a therapist. He would not have sought that out on his own. It was his best friend who sat him down and told him plainly that there was no prize for white-knuckling his way through something like this. I was grateful to that friend in a way I have trouble articulating. The trial is scheduled for spring. Jackson's attorney says he may be called to testify. He says he is ready for that. I believe him. As for me, I'm still in the spare room, still drinking my coffee in the morning, still watching the squirrels on the lawn. I am 67 years old. I have buried a wife I loved for 39 years. I have watched my son rebuild himself from something that would have broken a lesser man. I don't take either of those facts lightly. People sometimes ask, when they hear pieces of this story, how I could have lived in the same house as that woman and not known, not seen something that would have told me. I don't have a satisfying answer. I saw things I explained away. I noticed things I decided were none of my business. I liked her, and liking someone will make you very good at not seeing what you don't want to see. What I know is this. My son called me from an airport terminal with a shaking voice and trusted me to stay calm for him, and I did. That's the part I can account for. That's the part I hold on to. The rest of it, the how and the why and the full shape of who she actually was, I've decided I'm going to leave to the courts and to people with more patience for that kind of excavation than I have left in me. My son is going to be all right. I am certain of that in the way I am certain of very few things anymore. And sometimes, on the quiet mornings, that is enough.